Lieutenant Karl Hoffmann stood frozen on the Normandy cliffside on June 6, 1944, his binoculars revealing an impossible sight. Through the morning mist, colossal metal beasts emerged directly from the churning sea onto Omaha Beach. "Mein Gott," he whispered, lowering the binoculars with trembling hands. Their landing tanks directly onto the beach. What Hoffmann witnessed that morning defied 7 years of Wehrmacht training and Nazi propaganda about American industrial inferiority. The massive landing craft disgorging fully operational Sherman tanks onto the sand contradicted everything he had been taught about naval warfare and amphibious operations. In the German military doctrine, tanks required proper ports and heavy cranes to unload. They were never meant to storm beaches directly. Yet before him, the Americans were doing the impossible, bringing armored warfare directly from sea to sand in a display of engineering and logistical prowess that would haunt him for the rest of his life. "In that moment," he later wrote in his memoirs, "I understood that we were not just fighting a different army, but a different reality, one where the rules of warfare had been completely rewritten by American industrial might." What Hoffmann and other German defenders witnessed that day was the culmination of years of secret American innovation, the development of specialized landing craft that would transform modern warfare forever and reveal a capability gap the Third Reich had never imagined possible. The roots of this technological disparity stretched back years before the Normandy landings. Throughout the 1930s and early 1940s, Nazi propaganda had carefully cultivated an image of American industrial weakness. Joseph Goebbels's Ministry of Public Enlightenment and Propaganda regularly depicted Americans as soft, decadent consumers incapable of wartime sacrifice or industrial discipline. German newspapers and radio broadcasts described the United States as a chaotic mixture of unemployed masses, striking workers, and inefficient factories. One 1942 Völkischer Beobachter editorial claimed, "The American assembly line produces beautiful refrigerators and automobiles for peacetime, but lacks the precision, engineering, and discipline required for sophisticated weapons of war." Even Hitler himself dismissed American industrial potential in a 1940 speech to his generals. "The Americans can build refrigerators and automobiles, but we Germans engineer weapons of war. It is our natural expertise." This propaganda found fertile ground among German military leaders who genuinely believed in their technological superiority. The vaunted German General Staff, with its prestigious history stretching back to Frederick the Great, considered American military doctrine simplistic and its equipment crude but mass-produced. General Alfred Jodl summarized the prevailing view in a 1941 assessment. "American equipment will be plentiful, but technically inferior. Their troops will be well supplied but poorly trained." This confidence extended specifically to amphibious operations. German military doctrine, influenced by centuries of European continental warfare, had never prioritized amphibious assault capabilities. The canceled Operation Sea Lion, the planned invasion of Britain, had relied on conventional barges that would have required captured port facilities. The concept of specialized landing craft capable of delivering tanks directly onto hostile beaches simply did not exist in German military thinking. General Oberst Heinz Guderian, the father of German armored warfare, wrote in his pre-war treatise Achtung, Panzer, that tanks were essentially land weapons requiring proper port facilities for deployment in overseas operations. When intelligence reports of American experiments with amphibious vehicles first reached Berlin in 1942, they were largely dismissed as impractical prototypes that could never be mass-produced or effectively deployed in combat conditions. Admiral Karl Dönitz, head of the Kriegsmarine, assessed in 1943, "The Americans may attempt limited amphibious operations, but the logistical challenges of landing heavy equipment on open beaches remain insurmountable." This fundamental misunderstanding of American industrial capability and engineering ingenuity would prove catastrophic. The reality developing across the Atlantic defied these German expectations. While Nazi propaganda portrayed Americans as soft consumers, the United States was undergoing the most dramatic industrial transformation in human history. In 1941, the year America entered the war, President Roosevelt called for 50,000 aircraft to be produced annually, a number German analysts dismissed as preposterous fantasy. By 1944, American factories were producing 96,000 aircraft per year, nearly double Roosevelt's impossible goal. This production miracle extended across all categories of war materiel. American shipyards employing innovative modular construction techniques and welding instead of riveting reduced the construction time of Liberty ships from initially 240 days to an astonishing 42 days by 1943. At the peak of production, the legendary Kaiser shipyards completed one Liberty ship every 6 hours and 15 minutes, a pace that German naval engineers calculated to be mathematically impossible based on their own shipbuilding standards. Most relevant to the coming invasion shock was the American development of specialized landing craft. In 1940, American engineers began designing the landing craft tank, LCT, and landing ship tank, LST, revolutionary vessels specifically created to deliver tanks directly onto beaches. By 1944, American shipyards had produced over 1,000 of these specialized craft. Each landing ship tank could carry 20 Sherman tanks directly to shore, discharging them through massive bow doors onto the beach. This capability had no parallel in the German Navy. When shown aerial reconnaissance photographs of these vessels in early 1944, Kriegsmarine Admiral Theodor Krank reportedly dismissed them as specialized equipment that can never be produced in militarily significant numbers. The United States had produced over 1,000. The scale of American production extended far beyond specialized landing craft. While German propaganda portrayed the United States as a nation of frivolous consumers, American industry was outproducing the entire Axis combined. By 1944, the United States was manufacturing a new Sherman tank every 30 minutes. During the entire war, Germany produced approximately 49,000 tanks of all types. The United States produced nearly 90,000, despite not entering the conflict until December 1941. American factories delivered over 2,600,000 military trucks, more than all other combatant nations combined. Germany, with its vaunted engineering tradition, produced approximately 345,000 military vehicles during the same period. The disparity extended to every category of military equipment. The United States produced 6 times more artillery pieces than Germany, 11 times more military aircraft, and an astonishing 40 times more ammunition. These were not just statistics, but the physical manifestation of industrial capability that would soon confront German defenders on the beaches of Normandy. The journey of Lieutenant Karl Hoffmann from true believer to disillusioned witness began long before D-Day. As a 22-year-old graduate of the Wehrmacht Officer Academy, Hoffmann had absorbed the prevailing wisdom about American industrial and military capabilities. His instructors, veterans of the Polish and French campaigns, had emphasized German qualitative superiority over potential enemies. One German tank is worth 10 American tanks, his armor instructor had confidently declared in 1942. The American relies on quantity because he cannot achieve quality. Hoffmann had no reason to question these assessments. His military education had included detailed studies of German engineering achievements like the Tiger tank, with its formidable 88mm gun and thick armor plate. Nothing in his training had prepared him for what awaited on the Norman coast. Hoffmann's first encounter with American industrial might came indirectly through the relentless Allied bombing campaign of 1943. Assigned to a coastal defense unit in northern France, he witnessed increasingly massive formations of American bombers, sometimes 1,000 aircraft in a single raid, darkening the skies above. In his diary, he noted with growing concern, "The Americans send more bombers in one raid than we can launch in a month. Their losses are high, but they simply replace them faster than we can shoot them down. During a leave in Hamburg in late 1943, Hoffman saw firsthand the devastating impact of American industrial output when he witnessed the aftermath of Operation Gomorrah, the Allied bombing campaign that dropped over 9,000 tons of bombs on the city in a single week. The scale of destruction challenged his understanding of what was militarily possible. "The Americans are producing bombs faster than we can rebuild," he wrote to his brother on the Eastern Front. By spring 1944, Hoffman had been reassigned to the 352nd Infantry Division, defending a sector of what the Germans called the Atlantic Wall, the coastal fortifications designed to repel the anticipated Allied invasion. Despite Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring's dismissive assessment that American soldiers are good at playing cowboys and Indians, not fighting real wars, Hoffman had developed a growing respect for American capabilities. Intelligence reports crossing his desk included disturbing details about new types of landing craft being massed in southern England, though their exact capabilities remained unclear. His requests for additional anti-tank defenses along the beaches were denied, with his superior officer explaining, "The Americans cannot land tanks directly on the beaches. They will need to capture a port first, which gives us time to respond." This fundamental misunderstanding of American capabilities would prove fatal. On the morning of June 6, 1944, Lieutenant Hoffman was awakened by the thunder of naval gunfire. Racing to his observation post on the cliffs overlooking what the Allies called Omaha Beach, he witnessed what he later described as the impossible made routine. Through his binoculars, he observed massive landing craft approaching the shore, their bow doors dropping to disgorge fully operational Sherman tanks directly onto the beach. "I counted 20, then 40, then lost count," he later recalled. "They were landing more tanks in 1 hour than we could deploy in a week, and doing so directly onto an open beach under fire." The German defenses, designed primarily to repel infantry landings, proved ineffective against this armored onslaught. By midday, Hoffman had ordered a retreat from his position, recognizing that the defensive calculations had been based on a fatally flawed understanding of American capabilities. What shocked Hoffman and other German defenders was not just the presence of tanks on the beach, but the seemingly casual way the Americans overcame engineering challenges the Germans had deemed insurmountable. The landing vehicle, tracked LVT, known as the Amtrak, demonstrated amphibious capabilities that German engineers had dismissed as technically impossible for a mass-produced vehicle. The specialized duplex-drive Sherman tanks, designed to swim ashore using canvas flotation screens, represented an approach to amphibious operations entirely absent from German military thinking. Most impressive were the massive landing ship tank vessels, floating fortresses capable of delivering multiple tanks, trucks, and hundreds of troops directly onto unsecured beaches. Oberst Werner Pluskat, commanding coastal artillery near Utah Beach, expressed the prevailing shock in a radio transmission preserved in German military archives. "They are landing not an army but an entire industrial nation on our shores." The revelation extended beyond specialized landing craft. German defenders witnessed American troops casually using equipment that would have been considered precious resources in the Wehrmacht. Communications officer Dieter Lange described his astonishment at captured American field telephones. They were using brand-new telephones with plastic casings, a material we reserved for our most essential military equipment, and simply abandoning them when they moved positions. What was precious to us was disposable to them. Medical officer Dr. Franz Gockel was similarly shocked by the contents of captured American aid stations. They had more sulfa drugs and morphine in one battalion aid station than I had seen in an entire month on the Eastern Front. Their medics carried more medical supplies than our field hospitals could stock. These observations began to reveal the true disparity in industrial capacity between the Third Reich and the United States. As the days after the invasion turned into weeks, the evidence of American productive capacity became increasingly overwhelming. Hoffman, who remained on the Norman front until late July before being captured, documented the daily arrival of supplies with growing disbelief. Every morning reveals more tanks, more trucks, more guns than were present the day before, he wrote in his final diary entry before his capture. It is as if they have an endless reservoir of equipment that can be drawn upon at will. A fellow officer, Hauptmann Rudolf Schaefer, made a more explicit comparison. We measure our supplies in days and hours, carefully counting each shell and conserving fuel. The Americans measure in weeks and months, with ammunition expenditures we can scarcely comprehend. This disparity extended to every category of military supply. German units typically traveled with 3 days of ammunition and fuel. Their American counterparts carried supplies for 30 days of operations, with continuous resupply pipelines being established directly from the beaches. The most visible symbol of this industrial disparity was the Mulberry artificial harbors. Massive prefabricated ports constructed in Britain, towed across the English Channel, and assembled off the Normandy coast. These engineering marvels, each the size of the port of Dover, were created to address the very problem German strategists had assumed would limit the Allied invasion: the lack of major port facilities. Captain Heinrich Lütjens of the German Naval Intelligence was among the first to comprehend their significance. In a report to Naval High Command dated June 10, 1944, he wrote, "The Allies have not captured a port. They have brought their ports with them. This capability represents an industrial and engineering achievement we cannot match." The scale of the Mulberry harbors was difficult for German observers to comprehend. Artificial structures, larger than many natural harbors, assembled in days rather than the years such projects would normally require. Perhaps most demoralizing to German defenders was the American approach to equipment maintenance and replacement. Wehrmacht doctrine emphasized meticulous maintenance and field repairs to preserve precious vehicles and weapons. In contrast, American forces often simply replaced damaged equipment rather than attempting time-consuming repairs. Feldwebel Anton Richter, who served as a maintenance officer before his capture in July 1944, described his astonishment at American repair protocols. "When we captured an American maintenance depot, I discovered they were replacing entire engines rather than repairing them, entire transmission systems rather than individual components. What would be a precious resource to be salvaged in our Army was simply a replaceable part to them." This approach extended to personal equipment as well. German soldiers typically carried the same rifle, the same boots, the same helmet throughout their service. American troops regularly received new uniforms, new boots, even new weapons as equipment wore out or was damaged. The revelation of American industrial might had profound psychological effects on German defenders. Lieutenant Kurt Meyer of the 12th SS Panzer Division described the impact in stark terms. "Each Allied ship firing on our positions represented more steel than we could produce in a month. Each wave of aircraft dropping bombs contained more aluminum than our factories could refine in a week. We were not fighting an army, but an industrial colossus." This recognition fundamentally altered how German officers assessed their strategic position. Major Wilhelm Tiege, an operations officer with the 7th Army, wrote in a memorandum that was later captured, "The arithmetic of our situation has become clear. We can destroy 10 American tanks, and they will have 11 replacements the next day. We can shoot down 20 aircraft, and they will deploy 30 new ones. This is not a battle of armies, but a battle between our entire war economy and a mere segment of theirs." The experiences of German prisoners of war provided even more direct evidence of American industrial abundance. Hoffman, captured in late July 1944, described his initial processing at an American POW facility as revelatory. "They gave each prisoner a new uniform, new underwear, new boots, items that had become precious luxuries for our own frontline troops. When I asked why they provided brand new materials to prisoners, the American sergeant simply shrugged and said, It's easier than cleaning your old ones. This casual abundance extended to food rations. Wehrmacht soldiers had subsisted on increasingly meager rations as the war progressed. American POW camps provided diets that exceeded what many Germans had experienced as civilians before the war. Medical officer Dr. Werner Kirschner documented the health impacts in a report smuggled back to Germany. German prisoners are gaining an average of 12 pounds within the first 6 weeks of captivity. Their dental health, vitamin levels, and overall physical condition improved dramatically simply through exposure to standard American military rations. Transportation officer Hauptmann Friedrich Müller observed American logistical operations firsthand as a prisoner assigned to camp maintenance. His assessment, later included in a debriefing by German intelligence, was blunt. The Americans utilize mechanization as casually as we employ manual labor. Tasks that would require 100 men in our army are accomplished by 10 Americans with appropriate machinery. Their standard of industrial support makes our most ambitious logistics plans seem like primitive improvisations. This observation extended to medical care as well. German medical units relied heavily on horse-drawn ambulances and field hospitals with limited supplies. American evacuation chains included fleets of purpose-built ambulances and fully equipped field hospitals with capabilities rivaling German civilian facilities. Captured medical officer Dr. Hans Weber noted, "They transfuse blood as freely as we administer water, use penicillin in quantities we can only dream of, and consider surgical facilities we would deem exceptional to be merely standard." For many German prisoners, the most shocking aspect of American abundance was its apparent wastefulness. Oberleutnant Walter Drexler, captured near St. Lo in July 1944, described his astonishment at American disposal practices. "I witnessed American quartermasters bulldozing excess rations into pits, food of a quality and quantity that German civilians would have fought over. When I expressed shock, the American officer simply explained it was easier to bury excess than transport it backward." Similar observations came from prisoners exposed to American maintenance facilities. Technical Sergeant Karl-Heinz Richter, an automotive specialist, reported the Americans would replace an entire Jeep engine rather than repair a faulty fuel pump. Parts we would have carefully salvaged and refurbished were simply discarded and replaced with new components. This apparent wastefulness was not military inefficiency, but rather evidence of a production capacity so vast that replacement was more efficient than repair. The overwhelming evidence of American industrial superiority created a cascade of realizations among German personnel. The first was often disbelief, followed by rationalization, and finally a fundamental reassessment of Germany's strategic position. Artillery officer Lieutenant Paul Hofmeister captured this progression in letters smuggled to his family. "At first I believed the Americans must be concentrating their entire production on our sector. Surely they cannot maintain this level of supply everywhere. Then I realized this is not their maximum effort, but merely their standard operating procedure. The material advantage they enjoy is not temporary, but systematic and overwhelming." This recognition often led to a more profound questioning of the propaganda that had shaped their expectations. Feldwebel Georg Reiter wrote in a diary discovered after his death in August 1944, "If they lied to us about American industrial capacity, what else might be untrue? The foundation of our confidence is cracking with each American tank that rolls off their landing craft." By late summer 1944, the cumulative impact of witnessed American industrial might had created a crisis of confidence throughout the German forces in Normandy. Colonel Günther von Kluge, in his final report before being relieved of command, wrote, "We face not merely an enemy army, but the mobilized industrial potential of a continent. Their material superiority is not 4 or 5 to 1, as our intelligence estimated, but 20 or 30 to 1 in critical categories. This is not a disparity that tactical brilliance or fighting spirit can overcome." This assessment was shared by frontline officers like Hauptmann Werner Körde, who commanded a panzer company until his capture in August. Each day brought fresh evidence of a material imbalance too vast to be bridged by even the most perfect German engineering or the most fanatical devotion to duty. We were crafting precision timepieces by hand. They were manufacturing steamrollers by the thousand. The psychological transformation extended beyond military calculations to fundamental questions about national capacity and propaganda. SS Sturmbannführer Karl Brandt, a committed National Socialist captured in the Falaise pocket, documented his cognitive dissonance in a personal journal, later seized by American intelligence. I have witnessed capabilities that our leaders assured us were impossible for the industrially chaotic Americans to achieve. Either our intelligence services completely failed to assess their capacity, or we were deliberately misled about their capabilities. Neither possibility offers comfort. This crisis of confidence spread through prisoner-of-war camps as captured soldiers compared experiences and observations. POW camp administrators noted the emergence of heated debates about whether Germany had ever possessed a realistic chance of victory given the industrial disparity they had witnessed. For many prisoners, the most profound psychological impact came from comparing their observations of American abundance with letters from home describing increasing privation in Germany. Unteroffizier Heinrich Wagner preserved a collection of this correspondence, creating a stark juxtaposition between his own experiences and civilian conditions. My wife writes that she queues 5 hours for a loaf of bread in Berlin, while here I am served white bread without limit. She melts down candle stubs to have light in the evenings. The American camp is illuminated all night by electric lights they never bother to switch off. My children have not tasted real coffee in years. Here it is, served twice daily and often discarded half consumed. These contrasts undermined not just military morale, but the entire ideological framework that had sustained German confidence in ultimate victory despite temporary setbacks. The transformation was particularly profound for officers who had fully embraced Nazi ideology and its assertions of German qualitative superiority. Lieutenant Max Werner, a former Hitler Youth leader commissioned directly into the Wehrmacht, described his psychological journey. I had been raised to believe in German scientific and industrial preeminence, that our superior engineering and discipline would ultimately triumph over American mass production of inferior equipment. The evidence before my eyes, day after day in captivity, systematically destroyed that belief. Their inferior equipment was more reliable, more plentiful, and more advanced than our superior German technology. This recognition often triggered a broader reassessment of the regime's truthfulness. Artillery officer Gustav Meissner wrote in a letter later intercepted by camp censors, "If the Führer was so wrong about American industrial capability, a measurable, observable fact, how can we trust his assessments of our strategic position or ultimate victory?" The overwhelming evidence produced numerous psychological responses among German personnel. Some, like Oberst Wilhelm Fahle, retreated into denial, insisting that the observed American abundance was a carefully orchestrated deception. They are showing us their entire stockpile to create an illusion of limitless supply. Others developed elaborate rationalizations, arguing that American material advantage was counterbalanced by German spiritual and tactical superiority. Major Rudolf Stegmann wrote in a staff assessment in July 1944, "The Americans can produce more tanks, but they cannot produce better men to crew them. Our qualitative human advantage will ultimately negate their quantitative material superiority." But for many, the evidence eventually overwhelmed such rationalizations. Hauptmann Josef Lieb, who surrendered his company near Caen, expressed the growing sentiment, "We have been fighting a war of flesh against steel, and steel is winning." Nowhere was the psychological impact of American industrial might more evident than in the changing attitudes toward the future of the conflict. Intelligence officers debriefing German prisoners noted a marked decline in confidence about Germany's prospects after exposure to American logistics operations. Major Philip Darren, who conducted over 300 interviews with German officers, summarized his findings. Upon initial capture, approximately 65% expressed confidence in eventual German victory. After 3 weeks in our facilities, witnessing our standard operating procedures and supply systems, this percentage drops to less than 15%. This transformation often manifested as concern for family members still in Germany. Lieutenant Wilhelm Bartsch, captured near Carentan, expressed a sentiment common among prisoners. I pray the High Command recognizes what I have seen and ends this war before our cities are completely destroyed. We cannot win against this industrial juggernaut. Prolonging the conflict only ensures more German suffering. The psychological impact extended to the highest levels of German command. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, after being relieved as Commander-in-Chief West following the Allied breakout from Normandy, reportedly told his staff, "We have been fighting the wrong enemy. From the beginning, we should have fought alongside the British and Americans against Russia." This statement, while certainly influenced by immediate military setbacks, reflected a growing recognition among senior officers that Germany had fundamentally miscalculated the industrial balance of power. General Heinz Guderian, Inspector General of Armored Troops, documented in a memorandum to Hitler the material disparities that had become apparent. The enemy can replace an entire Panzer Division's equipment losses in 1 week. We require 6 months to achieve the same reconstitution. This disparity cannot be overcome by tactical measures alone. Such assessments, while technically accurate, often found little receptivity among the Nazi leadership, which increasingly retreated into fantasies of wonder weapons that would negate Allied material superiority. For the soldiers who experienced American industrial might firsthand, the psychological transformations often outlasted the war itself. Karl Hoffmann, whose observation of tanks landing directly on Normandy beaches began our account, settled in the United States in 1952 after his release from captivity. In his memoirs published in 1978, he reflected, "What I witnessed on June 6, 1944, was not simply a new military capability, but a revelation of what free enterprise, properly harnessed to national purpose, could achieve. The America that landed on those beaches wasn't just defeating Nazism. It was demonstrating an alternative vision of industrial organization that would ultimately prove more powerful than any ideology." This assessment was shared by many former officers who experienced American abundance firsthand. Technical Officer Werner Braun, who worked on the V-2 rocket program before being captured in France, wrote in 1956, "Germany's defeat was not military but industrial. We lost because our entire productive philosophy, emphasizing quality over quantity, craftsmanship over mass production, proved inadequate against American industrial methods. The overwhelming statistical evidence of American productive superiority became fully apparent only after the war. The United States had produced over 300,000 aircraft during the conflict, compared to Germany's 119,000. American shipyards had launched 27 aircraft carriers. Germany completed none. The United States manufactured over 87,000 tanks and self-propelled guns. Germany produced approximately 49,000. But perhaps most telling was the disparity in motorization. American factories delivered over 2,600,000 military trucks and jeeps, while Germany produced approximately 345,000 motor vehicles. The German army, despite its mechanized image, relied primarily on horses for transportation and logistics throughout the war, using over 2,700,000 horses compared to America's approximately 35,000. This fundamental disparity explained what German soldiers witnessed in Normandy, an American force fully motorized down to the squad level, with a logistical system that could deliver unprecedented quantities of supplies directly to the front lines. The production statistics that most directly related to the shock of the Normandy landings concerned specialized landing craft. By June 1944, American shipyards had produced 1,089 landing ship tank vessels, each capable of carrying 20 tanks directly onto beaches, along with 1,675 landing craft tank. These purpose-built vessels had no equivalent in the German naval inventory and represented a capability that German military doctrine had never seriously contemplated. When combined with the 2,493 smaller landing craft vehicle personnel built for infantry landings, this amphibious fleet constituted the largest specialized landing force ever created, all produced in less than 3 years. The German Navy, by contrast, had focused its limited resources on submarine warfare and a handful of surface capital ships, with minimal investment in amphibious capabilities even during planning for the invasion of England in 1940. The disparity extended beyond military production to the underlying industrial base. By 1944, American steel production reached 89 million tons annually, more than twice Germany's peak production of 42 million tons. American aluminum refining, critical for aircraft production, reached 1 million tons annually by war's end. German production never exceeded 250,000 tons. Perhaps most critically, American petroleum production reached 184 million tons in 1944, while Germany, increasingly reliant on synthetic fuel production as Romanian oil fields became targets for Allied bombers, struggled to produce 8 million tons of oil annually. This fundamental resource disparity explained what German prisoners observed. American forces could operate with minimal fuel conservation, maintaining fully motorized logistics chains and conducting fuel-intensive operations like continuous bomber offensives without the constraints that hampered German operations. The industrial disparity was made more remarkable by the fact that wartime production represented only a portion of American industrial output. Even at the peak of war mobilization, approximately 40% of American industrial capacity remained dedicated to civilian production. German observers who later toured American factories were astonished to learn that auto manufacturers like Ford and General Motors had continued producing civilian vehicles throughout much of the war, albeit at reduced volumes, while simultaneously manufacturing tanks, aircraft, and other military equipment. This contrasted sharply with German industrial policy, which had shifted almost entirely to military production by 1943, creating severe shortages of consumer goods. The ability of the American economy to sustain both a massive military buildup and a civilian standard of living higher than pre-war Germany demonstrated a productive capacity that Nazi propaganda had systematically misrepresented. Most shocking to German military professionals was the revelation that the United States had achieved this productive miracle while maintaining a smaller percentage of its population in uniform than Germany. At peak mobilization, approximately 16% of the American adult male population served in the military. The German figure exceeded 25%. This meant the United States maintained a larger civilian workforce for industrial production, despite having a population only 1.5 times larger than Germany's. The American decision to exempt skilled industrial workers from military service, a policy criticized by German propaganda as evidence of low morale and unwillingness to fight, proved strategically sound, allowing for both military manpower and industrial output that Germany could not match. By 1944, American factories employed over 18 million workers in war production, including 6 million women, a workforce larger than the entire German manufacturing sector. The mathematical impossibility of German victory became clear through production trends over time. While German war production increased between 1942 and 1944 despite Allied bombing, American production increased at a far faster rate. By 1944, a single American factory complex, the Willow Run plant near Detroit, was producing one B-24 Liberator heavy bomber every 63 minutes, 24 hours per day. This single facility was outputting more aircraft, measured by airframe weight, than the entire German aviation industry. Similar disparities existed across all production categories. The American Liberty Ship program was launching 3 new cargo vessels daily. German shipyards struggled to complete 1 merchant vessel per week. This accelerating disparity meant that even as German forces fought desperately to contain the Normandy beachhead, the material imbalance was growing more unfavorable by the day. For German soldiers who witnessed American logistics firsthand, the most impressive aspect was often not the quantity of equipment, but the systematic integration of industrial production, transportation, and battlefield deployment. Major Friedrich von Stauffenberg, who observed American supply operations as a prisoner of war, later wrote, "The truly remarkable achievement was not producing thousands of trucks, impressive as that was, but creating an integrated system where those trucks operated on standardized parts, consumed standardized fuel, traveled on rapidly constructed roads, and delivered supplies packaged in standardized containers." The Americans had not just mass-produced equipment, they had mass-produced logistics itself. This systematic approach extended to maintenance and repair. While German maintenance relied heavily on skilled craftsmen capable of improvising repairs with limited parts, American operations centered on rapid replacement of standardized components, a system that required less skilled labor per vehicle but far more robust industrial support. The systematic nature of American production was perhaps most visible in the field of medical care. German medical services, while technically sophisticated, suffered increasing shortages of basic supplies as the war progressed. American military medicine, by contrast, operated with seemingly unlimited resources. Captain Dr. Ernst Gilman, captured after the medical station he commanded was overrun near St. Lo, described his astonishment at American medical logistics. They possessed standardized medical kits with identical contents, whether in Normandy or the Pacific. Every medic carried penicillin doses that in our medical system would have been reserved for a field hospital. Their blood transfusion system, with refrigerated blood collected in the United States and delivered to frontline surgical units, represented a level of logistical sophistication we could not approach. This standardization extended to medical evacuation. By August 1944, the Americans had established a system that could move a wounded soldier from frontline aid station to fully equipped field hospital in under 2 hours, a capability German medical services could not match even in the early war years. The psychological impact of this overwhelming material disparity continued long after the Normandy campaign. For German officers held as prisoners of war in the United States, the journey across the Atlantic provided additional evidence of American industrial might. Naval officer Kapitän Leutnant Werner Henke described his first impression of New York Harbor. The scale of port facilities, the number of vessels under construction, invisible shipyards, the endless movement of cargo, all exceeded what I had believed possible based on our intelligence assessments. The port capacity I observed in a single day exceeded that of all German North Sea ports combined. This recognition continued as prisoners were transported to camps in the American interior. Artillery officer Heinrich Müller noted in a diary maintained during his captivity, "The railway network functions with a precision and capacity we had been told was impossible in the chaotic American system." More remarkable still is that this massive military transport system operates alongside apparently normal civilian rail traffic. The nearly 400,000 German prisoners held in American camps by war's end became unwitting students of American industrial methods. Many were assigned to agricultural work, exposing them to mechanized American farming, a stark contrast to the largely manual German agricultural sector. Farm manager turned infantry officer Johann Weber documented his observations. A single American farmer with appropriate machinery accomplishes what would require 20 laborers on a German estate. Their casual use of fuel-powered equipment for tasks we would perform manually reveals the true disparity in our industrial positions. This exposure had lasting influence. Agricultural economist Dr. Ludwig Erhard, briefly held as a prisoner before being identified as having no Nazi affiliations, later applied American mass production techniques as economics minister during West Germany's post-war economic miracle. His 1957 assessment was explicit. Germany's future prosperity depends on adapting the American system of mass production and mass consumption to our own cultural context. The industrial lessons extended beyond agriculture to manufacturing, construction, and logistics. Engineering officer Karl Blessing, who worked in a POW camp maintenance unit, later became a key figure in post-war German industrial reconstruction. His 1963 memoir credited his wartime observations. What I witnessed in America permanently altered my understanding of industrial organization. The German tradition of craftsman-based manufacturing could not compete with American methods of standardization, interchangeable parts, and production line efficiency. Civil engineer Franz Kiesling, who participated in camp expansion projects, noted techniques that would later influence his post-war career. They accomplished in days construction projects that would require months in Germany, not because their workers were faster, but because their entire system, from standardized building components to mechanized equipment to logistical support, was designed for speed rather than permanence. For many prisoners, the most profound revelation came from observing American civilian life during their captivity. Our post-war recovery required not just rebuilding our factories, but reimagining our entire approach to industrial production. Similar insights came from prisoners exposed to American construction methods. Unlike German civilian conditions, which deteriorated dramatically during the war years, American home front prosperity increased despite wartime mobilization. Unteroffizier Wilhelm Brasch, who worked at a camp near a small Midwest town, recorded his observations. The local population enjoys consumption levels that would be considered luxurious even in pre-war Germany. Private automobiles remain common despite rationing. Food is abundant, with restrictions mainly on symbolic items like sugar and coffee rather than basic nutrition. Most astonishing is that this standard of living exists alongside the most massive military buildup in history. This recognition challenged the fundamental Nazi narrative that mobilization for war required civilian sacrifice. The American system demonstrated that properly organized industrial capacity could provide both guns and butter simultaneously, a concept that contradicted German economic doctrine. The lasting psychological transformation extended beyond the war years as former prisoners returned to a devastated Germany. The contrast between American abundance and post-war German scarcity reinforced the lessons of industrial disparity. Former Luftwaffe pilot Otto Skorzeny, repatriated in 1946, wrote to a former comrade, "I returned to a Germany where civilians fight over scraps of coal for heating, while in America I observed warehouses full of surplus military equipment being sold as scrap." The distance between their industrial capacity and ours cannot be measured merely in percentages. It represents a fundamentally different level of development. This recognition influenced Germany's post-war orientation, with many former military officers becoming advocates for close alignment with the United States and adoption of American industrial methods. The Marshall Plan, which provided over $12 billion in American economic assistance to Western Europe between 1948 and 1952, found particularly fertile ground among Germans who had witnessed American productive capacity firsthand. The impact of this industrial revelation extended beyond economics to politics and culture. Many former officers who had experienced American logistics firsthand became skeptical of nationalist or autarkic economic policies, recognizing that Germany's future prosperity required integration into global trade networks dominated by American productive methods. Friedrich von Weizsäcker, a former staff officer who later served in West Germany's economics ministry, articulated this perspective in a 1953 policy paper. The lesson of 1944 is not simply that America outproduced Germany, but that a system of economic organization based on international cooperation, standardization, and mass production proved superior to one based on national self-sufficiency, craft tradition, and quality over quantity. Germany's future cannot lie in economic nationalism, but in participation in an integrated Western economic system. This recognition contributed to West Germany's enthusiastic participation in the emerging European coal and steel community, the precursor to the European Union, and the broader project of European economic integration. Perhaps the most lasting impact of the Industrial Revolution came through the thousands of former prisoners who applied American methods in rebuilding German industry. Engineering officer Walter Schmidt, who had observed aircraft production while detained near a Boeing plant in Washington state, later introduced assembly line techniques as director of Volkswagen's expanding operations in the 1950s. His assessment was pragmatic. I learned more about efficient manufacturing during 2 years as a prisoner than in my entire engineering education. The American approach, standardizing components, simplifying assembly, prioritizing production volume over craft perfection, initially seemed foreign to German industrial tradition, but it proved essential to our economic recovery. Similar influences emerged across German industry, from electronics to chemicals to consumer goods. The economic miracle of post-war West Germany drew heavily on lessons learned by those who had witnessed American industrial methods directly. The final irony of this industrial revelation was that the very abundance that had overwhelmed German forces during the war became the foundation for Germany's post-war reconstruction. The Marshall Plan provided not just financial assistance, but technical expertise, machinery, and raw materials that accelerated the adoption of American production methods. By 1960, West Germany had emerged as Europe's leading industrial power, with many sectors successfully blending traditional German engineering precision with American mass production techniques. Former artillery officer Heinrich Nordhoff, who became Volkswagen's post-war chairman, explicitly acknowledged this synthesis. We have combined the best of both worlds, German engineering quality with American production efficiency. This represents not defeat, but evolution, learning from what we observed during and after the conflict. The economic integration of Western Europe under American security guarantees created market conditions that rewarded precisely this synthesis of approaches. For the generation of German officers who witnessed American industrial might firsthand in Normandy or as prisoners of war, the lessons remained vivid throughout their lives. Karl Hoffmann, whose observation of tanks landing directly onto Omaha Beach opened our account, concluded his 1978 memoir with a reflection that summarized this lasting impact. What I witnessed that June morning was not merely a new military capability, but a revelation about comparative systems. The America that landed on those beaches represented not just military power, but an industrial philosophy that would reshape the post-war world. Those of us who experienced this revelation directly understood something that others learned only slowly. The future belonged not to nations that could build the most perfect individual weapon, but to those that could create systems of production, distribution, and deployment that operated at previously unimaginable scales. This was the true revolution revealed on the beaches of Normandy, not just in warfare, but in human organizational capacity. The mathematics of industrial disparity that became visible on the Normandy beaches in June 1944 would shape the remainder of the 20th century. What German defenders witnessed that morning was not simply a new military capability, but evidence of a productive system that would ultimately prove more decisive than any battlefield victory. The landing ship, tank that so astonished Lieutenant Hoffmann, represented more than an innovative vessel. It symbolized an approach to industrial organization that would dominate the post-war world. The revelation experienced by German observers on those Norman beaches that American industrial might had fundamentally rewritten the rules of modern warfare would extend far beyond military affairs to influence economic development, international relations, and the global balance of power for decades to come. In that sense, what began as a tactical surprise on June 6, 1944, evolved into a strategic revelation with implications that continue to shape our world today.